Hi, it's Penny here, and today we're going to be talking about all the book series that I finished in the year of 2024. So I actually think in 2024 I completed 17 series, which coincidentally I think is also the number of series I completed in 2023. I don't know how that's worked out. So starting off with one of my favorites, we have the Soldier Sun trilogy by Robin Hobb. So I think in 2023 I finished off The Realm of the Elderlings, and I really loved it. So I was looking for more Robin Hobb to read, and I found the Soldier Sun trilogy had a much lower average rating than The Realm of the Elderlings, but I thought I'll just try it, and I'm so glad I did because I ended up really loving it. So in this story we're following Navarre, who is the second son of a second son, and in this world second sons are always soldiers, and Navarre really just wants to do a good job, become a soldier, become an officer, serve his king, be a good husband, do all that stuff. He just wants to do what's expected of him. However, it doesn't go well. So this is kind of set in an alternate colonial America. So Navarre's people are the colonizers, and we also have kind of several different native people who are also at war between each other, and Navarre ends up getting kind of stuck in the middle of the magic of these native people, and the impact this magic has on his life is incredibly tragic at times. And just like the whole situation, especially as he gets to know more about the native people and kind of has to face up to some of the realities about what's going on. Anyway, I think if you like Robin Hobb, this has so much of what you get from The Realm of the Elderlings. We have a lot of tragedy. We have like really great character development, some characters I just really loved. The way the magic works is so different from a lot of other books that I've read. It's definitely slow-paced at times. Sometimes Navarre can be very frustrating as a main character, but I think that's very similar to Fitz in the Farseer trilogy. So even though the Soldier Sun trilogy has a much lower rating, I think if you really love Robin Hobb, it's definitely still worth giving this a go. I do think maybe one of the things that puts people off is the fat phobia, which is definitely something to be aware of going into it, but I actually really liked the realistic portrayal of that, even if it could be difficult to read at times. And to be honest, that was much less difficult to read about than some of the other awful things that are going on in this book series. Anyway, I do actually have a separate review of this series, which I will link down below. So I won't talk any more about that, or we'll be here forever. Another series I finished was The First Law World by Joe Abercrombie. So I think I read the first half of that series in 2023, and then in 2024 I read the last two standalones as well as the whole of the Age of Madness trilogy. And I personally didn't like that second half as much as the first half. I loved the original First Law trilogy. I love the characters and how terrible they were and all the terrible things that were happening. And I loved the little hint of magic. We definitely get less of the magic as we go through the series, and I felt like even though there was a lot about the Age of Madness trilogy that I did like, I also thought a lot of the themes were quite repetitive, and like there was a lot of potential to explore the themes, and it didn't really do as much as I would have liked it to do. It just repeated a lot of the same. And honestly, I actually loved the Age of Madness trilogy. I had a really great time with it. I think I just couldn't let go of the fact that it wasn't as good for me as the First Law trilogy. I know a lot of people feel the opposite way around, so I don't know, maybe don't listen to me. And I'm sure most of you would have heard about this series, but it's kind of like a grimdark fantasy. We have these different kingdoms at war, kind of an underlying magical thread that nothing much ever happens with. It's mostly about a bunch of characters really struggling. Most of them aren't really good people, and they almost learn some lessons and then usually end up not really learning anything at all. But Joe Abercrombie has a really great writing style, like a great dark sense of humor, and also quite often manages to weave in some lines that just like get so perfectly to the point that it's so satisfying. So I definitely recommend this series and this world, but for me, I'm always going to love that First Law trilogy the most. Then we have the Between Earth and Sky trilogy by Rebecca Roanhorse. So the final book in the series, Mirrored Heavens, came out in 2024. And this is another case where I started out really loving the series and then didn't feel like the ending was quite as good. So the first book, Black Sun, we're basically following different characters who have certain connections with the gods of this world. It's kind of like a pre-Columbian America. We have Serapio, whose mother did some quite awful things to him to get him a connection to the crow god. We also have Shiala, who is this like sea captain, and she has some kind of connection to the sea goddess, and they end up traveling together towards the capital, where we have Narampa, who is like a sun goddess, I think, and it's all kind of building up to this particular event that's going to happen. So the first book had a lot of momentum and kind of introduced a lot of conflict between the characters, as well as having some very like exciting moments. And I also thought that first book did a really great job of introducing the characters and making them feel really unique and like real people. Then the second book, they really spent just a lot of time traveling and not much happened. And in the third book, it all felt very generic. I felt like we didn't get a lot of what had been set up actually delivered on. So I was quite disappointed with the end of the series. And I've seen that as a fairly popular opinion. However, I'm looking at Goodreads right now and I can see the average rating for that last book is 4.26, which isn't actually bad. And I'm wondering if it's just because a lot of people dropped out after that second book and it's only people who really love the series that have continued. Anyway, I have actually done a series review for that series as well, so I'll link that rather than going on about it. But in general, this was a bit of a disappointing conclusion for me. Do you know, I'm looking at the rest of the books on this list and I feel like that is going to be a trend, which is really going to have me questioning why I've been putting so much effort into finishing series if they're all going to be this terrible. But anyway, another series that I finished in 2024 was the Crescent City series. I do think Sarah J Maas will write more in this world, but I'm going to pretend that's not true. In fact, I think I'm going to pretend in the future that this was a standalone, because this is the first book, House of Earth and Blood. It's a beautiful cover. It's a great story. We're introduced to Bryce, who is this party girl, and she sees something and has a connection to this murder that happens, and so as a result she gets paired up with this like guardian angel guy and they're investigating this murder that's happened. But no one really takes Bryce too seriously because she is this party girl, but kind of throughout the series she often proves them wrong and proves herself to be actually quite a badass. So I loved the fantasy world that Sarah J Maas introduced here. I love the characters. I even kind of like the romance, even though I'm not normally into romance. Actually, that's probably the problem. So book 2, terrible. Sarah J Maas really focused on like getting all the characters paired up, and Bryce just turned into an annoying character where she always anyway. The main thing is, the second and third books were super disappointing. Everything felt quite convenient. There was a lot of focus on characters I didn't really care about, as well as like a very annoying connection with some of her other worlds that I don't care about. Like, ugh. Do you know, I'm thinking that this is not an uncommon opinion, but I also know that some people, there are definitely people who are really into fantasy romance, who don't care so much about the fantasy plot, that did really love it. Look, House of Flame and Shadow still has an average rating of 4.2. Even House of Sky and Breath, the second book, has 4.45, which is only 0.01 lower than House of Earth and Blood. That makes zero sense to me when this is so much more superior to House of Sky and Breath. Anyway, let's just pretend this is a standalone going forward, and if you want to know about those other two books, that's nice for you, but I do not. I really didn't want this to be a negative video. This was meant to be a video being like, yeah, I finished so many series, let me tell you all about them. And now I'm realizing how many of these were terrible. So, next we have Mistborn Era 2 by Brandon Sanderson. So this actually started out well. So this is a quartet. I started it at the end of 2024. And then I was reading it like interwoven with the books from the Stormlight Archives. Like I was reading them in publication order to try and get all the like Cosmere interconnections. And honestly, there were quite a lot, and I wish there had been none. I think personally all the Cosmere connections really damaged the Mistborn Era 2 story. So let's step back a bit. The first book from Mistborn Era 2 is The Alloy of Lore, and I actually gave this one 4 stars. I didn't mind this one. This one is also the most disconnected from the rest of the Cosmere. So this is set in the same world as Mistborn Era 1, which is right behind me. I love Era 1 so much. The magic in this world is basically that you can consume metals, or certain people can consume metals and get certain powers, and then you have the Mistborns who are able to consume all the metals and use all the different powers, and there's also some other different magical things going on. So then Mistborn Era 2 is further in time, and now it's kind of like a Western setting, so people have guns, which is really interesting when you take this metal-based magic and you start integrating this metal-based magic with a more Western level of technology. And we're following Wax, who was like this lawman out in the Wild West kind of thing, except fantasy. And he's had to come back into town and become a lord, and has started trying to sort out the crime in the city. And his whole character arc was quite interesting in the first book. We also got Wayne, so it's Wax and Wayne. Hahaha, funny names. And Wayne is kind of a dick, kind of an awful person, provides a lot of the comic relief in the series, except that for me it was not a relief. For me it was very annoying, although, again, in the first book, he wasn't so bad, but it just got worse and worse. Part of it is the humor. So the humor got like more and more immature, a lot more fart jokes, jokes about burning buildings down, like just so much stupid shit. Every scene, by the time we got to the last book, every scene that Wayne was in, I was rolling my eyes. I grew to hate him so much. Do you know, I feel like I'm going to slip into a big rant about Mistborn Era 2, but I'm going to do a separate series review. So maybe I'll save my ranting for then. The summary is, I hated Mistborn Era 2, especially by the end. I think there was so much potential to do some cool stuff, and it all got lost along the way. Okay, then I picked up the Jaren series by Kate Elliott. So it starts with Jaren, and then there are 3 other books in the series. I mainly picked this up because when I was like in my late teens, early 20s, I had picked up what I thought was the second book. And I knew it was a story about this woman who'd come from some kind of like futuristic space traveling culture, and then somehow ended up on this planet with this nomadic tribe, kind of like pre-technology, and she kind of wants to just stay there and be in this toxic romance. And then her brother, or I actually remembered it was her father, but it was her brother, wanted her to go back and help like rule the human space empire. But actually, do you know what I remembered having read when I was younger? Never happened when I was rereading this series. So I don't even know what I was remembering. It was close, but it just never quite happened exactly like I remembered. Anyway, this series is kind of like a sci-fi romance. There is a lot of interesting cultural ideas. That is something Kate Elliott does well, but it's like bogged down in these weird relationships, and more as the series goes on, it wanders, loses its focus. The last book, I'm still not convinced it even really made sense, and like half of it is set on Earth, which is like not what I wanted at all from this series. I don't know. I'm actually getting, I think, more and more negative as I go through this video, even though that's probably not fair. The Jaren series was okay. It just wasn't really to my taste. But I am glad I read it just so that I could have my curiosity satisfied about what it was that I'd read when I was younger. Then also, I finished the Atlas series, so that started with Atlas 6, then the Atlas something else, finally the Atlas Complex. So I read the Atlas Complex, and it was really confusing and scattered. Again, another book where it felt like there was a good story in there, but the way it was being presented made it really hard to follow what was happening. So the Atlas 6 starts with like these 6 people who have been given the opportunity to join the Library of Alexandria, like the secret magical society. This isn't a world where magic is kind of the norm, but these particular 6 people have been chosen because they're so magically powerful. They just also happen to all be like 20-year-olds with a lot of mental instability. So they've been brought in to the Library of Alexandria. They have access to all the knowledge of the world, but they quickly find out that the idea is that while 6 of them have been inducted to the first year, only 5 of them are going to get to go on to the next year. And they're supposed to kill the other one, and they kind of have to come to some kind of agreement about who that will be. But there's also so much other stuff going on in this series. It's mostly about the relationships, which are really toxic, and there are some really great ideas in here. But the ending was so convoluted that I actually don't even know if I really remember what happened. Okay, I think the next 4 on my list are like YA or middle grade series. So first up, we have the Argosy trilogy by Sebastian de Castell. This is actually a spin-off from his Spellslinger series, which is like a 7-book series, I think, where we're following this young boy who's kind of had to go out into the world to learn about magic and everything else that's going on out there. Along the way, he meets this woman named Farius Parfax, who becomes his mentor. And this Argosy trilogy is basically Farius Parfax's backstory. So Farius Parfax is an Argosy, which is like in this world, these kind of like traveling philosophers, nomadic philosophers that have several different philosophies that they follow. They almost seem like a kind of magic, but they're not really. They're more like a way of thinking. And that's probably the best part about this series. And also the Spellslinger series, because Cal does learn a lot about that and kind of become an Argosy in the original series. So one thing about this series and the Spellslinger series is that in almost every book, Sebastian de Castell introduces like a whole new magic system, and I really love that. I will say I think the earlier books in the Argosy trilogy were stronger, and the magic that was being introduced was a lot cooler. The final book in the trilogy was kind of getting more into more of Farius's past and kind of her connection to these people who are basically the victims of genocide and trying to work out what the next steps for them were. I liked the general theme, but I was a bit frustrated with some of the directions that went in, and I just think the plot wasn't quite as strong as some of the previous books in the trilogy. So I think this trilogy still kind of fits into almost every other series I've talked about in this video, except for the Soldier Sun trilogy. The Argosy trilogy fits into that pattern where the end of the series wasn't as good as it started out. But despite that, I do recommend the series. I think it was really great, and I think it has a lot of really great ideas in it. It is also, I would say, kind of similar to Joe Abercrombie in that it has that sense of humor with a bit of grittiness to it, but it's not completely hopeless like the First Law World. I guess maybe because it's a YA series, so we don't want to destroy people's hope when they're too young. Anyway, the summary is, even though I do think the series didn't end quite as well as it started, I still definitely recommend it. Then we also have the In Every Generation trilogy by Kendara Blake. So this is like a Buffy spin-off where the main character is the daughter of Willow, and she is both a witch, and at the beginning of the series, she also discovers she's now the new Slayer, which isn't at all what she wanted, not at all what she's prepared for, but that's what's happening. And we get some of the kind of original Buffy characters coming back to help her with her role. There is also kind of a mystery going on around what happened to Buffy and the other Slayers. I like some of what was going on in this trilogy, and I definitely still think it had a lot of what the original Buffy series had in terms of feel. I think the problem for me is I keep picking up all these Buffy things because I have a lot of nostalgia for the original series, but I watched the original series when I was a teen and a young adult, and I'm not really any of those things now. And a lot of the new Buffy things that are being created are still targeting teens and young adults because that is the appropriate audience for Buffy things. So I pick them up wanting the nostalgia, but then they're not really, or I'm not the target audience. So then I'm like, this isn't what I wanted. So regardless, I do actually think the series was a lot of fun. I liked the mystery about what was happening with the Slayers. I did get a little bit frustrated with some of the original cast that are now adults acting a lot like teenagers and like very irresponsible at times, because as an adult I'm like, can you grow up? Also, a lot of the teen stuff, I wasn't that interested in it, but I thought it was quite well written. Like, I think if you are younger and you like Buffy stuff, or you like books, like YA books, even if you are older, because maybe you're not as much of a grumpy adult as me, I don't know. Anyway, I think this series was a lot of fun. And talking about series that are a lot of fun, I also read all of Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians by Brandon Sanderson. So this series is kind of ridiculous. We're following Alcatraz, who is an orphan, and he discovers that he has connections to this secret world. So it turns out, like, in between all the countries that we know about, there's actually other countries, but the evil librarians have been keeping this from us and, like, keeping a lot of information from us normal people. And so Alcatraz discovers there's a whole other world out there, gets kind of very involved in it, and kind of like becomes a central part of this bigger battle between good and evil going on. There's some really clever things going on in this series. There's also a lot of like really stupid humor, but I think it suits the kind of middle grade target audience a lot better than like Mistborn Era 2, where I feel like the maturity level of the jokes was very similar, but it didn't suit the story at all. So Alcatraz, a lot of fun, really clever. Sometimes maybe it lost momentum a little bit, and I've just remembered the very ending was a particular thing that I don't like, but it's very particular to me, so let's not worry about that. I think if you like fun, clever, middle grade, then you'll have a lot of fun with this series. I did also finish off this series, which I think is called the Odysseus series. Oh no, I'm suddenly doubting my pronunciation of Greek names. Odysseus? Odysseus. Anyway, this is like a YA retelling, but following Odysseus when he's young, and he kind of makes friends with Menelaus, just as like Menelaus's father is being assassinated, and they have to, in this one, go on kind of an adventure to save Menelaus. And then the second book, I think Odysseus also has to basically go back and save Menelaus again. But there was a little bit of a weird romancy thing that I wasn't a fan of, primarily because Odysseus is supposed to marry Penelope. My name is Penny, and I quite like the myth of Penelope, so I feel a strong connection to her, and I'm very annoyed about Odysseus every time he's a terrible husband, even though at this point he's just a teenager, but like still. What is he doing having these other romances? That's not what I want. What I actually wanted the whole time I was reading this was just to actually get Penelope. But we didn't, so that's a shame. But I do think this was still like a nice Greek myth retelling, kind of focusing on some stories that maybe aren't the typical stories that you hear, and like really framing them in that YA perspective. I will say this did look into some darker themes. There is like abuse and slavery and maybe some other things that I've forgotten in here. But I think if you like Greek retellings and you also like YA stories that deal with difficult topics, this is maybe a good mix of those. Okay, then everything else I have on the list is graphic novels, but I do think actually this section will be much more positive. I don't know what that means. But anyway, firstly we have The Cursed Princess Club by Lamcat. This started out as a webtoon, but it is now being published as books. I'm not actually sure how far through the story has been published into books yet, but it must be getting near the end based on that latest cover. Surely. Anyway, The Cursed Princess Club is about the 3 pastel princesses who have been betrothed to the 3 plaid princes. But while the first 2 princesses are like classically beautiful fairy tale princesses who sing to birds and have flowers grow all around them, the 3rd princess has green skin and green hair and pointy teeth. And she's a lovely person, but everyone's kind of scared of what she looks like. So when the 3rd plaid prince discovers that's what she looks like, he is aghast that he has to marry her, and when she realizes that he thinks she's ugly, she runs out into the forest and then meets up with the Cursed Princess Club, which is basically a group of princesses that are living out in the forest, and they have not been able to cure their curses, but they form a great friendship with this princess. And there's just so much more to the story than that. Like in the beginning it just sounds like a really silly little comic, but it has so many wholesome messages, so many great jokes. The way the plot actually comes together, I thought was so well done. Like, I love The Cursed Princess Club. I didn't think I would love it this much, but I love it. One of my most favorites. Then we also have Bug Boys by Laura Knetzer. So I read all 3 volumes of this, I think, in 2024. And it's just this super cute story about 2 bugs, Rhino Bee and Stag Bee, who are good friends, and they go on all sorts of buggy adventures. Again, really cute, really funny. I'm not in love with the series as much as I am The Cursed Princess Club, but I still had a really great time with it, so I still recommend it if you just want something really cute and fun. Then I also read the Garlic series by Bree Paulson. So this is Garlic and the Vampire and then Garlic and the Witch. So this follows this group of like vegetable people. So there's a witch and she's made these vegetable people, and the vegetable people work on the farm growing vegetables and then like selling them to people. This is meant to be just super cute and wholesome. I could not get over the fact that these vegetables are harvesting and selling vegetables. It's way too creepy for me, but it's not meant to be creepy. It's meant to be cute, but I personally couldn't get over it. And there's something as well that happens in the second book, which I also thought was super creepy, which I can't talk about because it's spoilers, but anyway, in the first book, basically, this vampire moves into the castle on the hill and everyone's like, oh, Garlic, you can go and talk to him because you won't be at risk because he won't be able to do anything to you. You're Garlic. And the story ends up being quite cute. Same with Garlic and the Witch. Like, these are cute, wholesome stories, but also, why are these vegetables selling vegetables? Then lastly, we have 3 reread graphic novels. So I reread the Lock and Key series by Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez. This is about this family that's had like a very traumatic event happen, and as a result they've gone to stay at their family's fancy big house, the Key House. And throughout this house there are all these magical keys hidden that they start discovering and using, and the magical keys are all really cool, but there is kind of like this darker element to them, and maybe they're not the only ones interested in using the keys, and there's kind of a mystery about what's happened in the past with the keys. So I love that series, even though it is a bit insensitive in its language at times. I also reread the Descender series and the Ascender series by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen. This is set when humans have spread out across the universe and then these giant robots turn up and just like kill off a bunch of them, and in retaliation the humans start culling the robots, and primarily we're following this cute companion robot who's trying to find his human family, and he gets stuck in the middle of this conflict between the robots and the humans. Then in Ascender, the story kind of continues, except that there's now a more magical component as well. I didn't think Ascender was quite as good as Descender, but as a reread, I still really enjoyed this overall. There was a lot I had forgotten, and it's like a really emotional story. Like, I dare you to read this and not fall in love with any of the robots. I dare you. Then lastly, I also reread White Sand by Brandon Sanderson. So this was as part of my big Cosmere reread. This is about this planet covered in sand, or at least the day side is covered in sand. So we've got the day side and the night side of the planet. On the day side, there's people who can use the sand to do certain magic, but there's a big kind of political conflict going on with that. And we're following a young guy who kind of becomes forced into taking leadership of dealing with the conflict. I honestly think this story just doesn't fit graphic format very well. A lot of the pages are really boring and plain. I think they did try to shake up the art style in the second and third volumes, but it still wasn't to my taste. And I just honestly don't think that Brandon Sanderson's writing works well in graphic form. It definitely didn't work well for this. I think I liked it a little bit better on reread, but not by much. So that is all the series that I completed in 2024. That was a lot more negative than I thought it was going to be. However, I do also have a list right in front of me that I'm going to talk about in another video, which is series that I caught up on, and I can see a lot of those were really positive. So we can actually turn the negativity of this video around and say that it's a positive thing, because I completed a lot of series that I haven't been loving or that have turned into something I didn't love. And now the only series I still have in progress are ones that I am loving. So while maybe it wasn't that great for 2024, it should be really great for 2025. Is that the way we're going to look at it? I think so. Do let me know if you have read any of the series that I talked about in this video. I would love to know what you think about them. Are you as negative as me, or are you a little bit more of a positive person? Let's chat down below. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.